Welcome to the Five Thread podcast. In this episode, we talk to Louise Pullan. Lou is a kit operations specialist for Commonwealth Games England and has held previous roles as the head of kitting out for British Olympic Association. I describe Lou as the Oracle of Teamwear, and in this episode, we discuss the importance of involving athletes in the development process and how we can take simple, practical actions to reduce waste and implement sustainable procurement practices. Welcome to the Five Thread podcast. I am super excited to have the Oracle of Teamwear, Louise Pullan, with me today. I didn't really know how to introduce you, Lou, apart from you are the Oracle of Teamwear. I've never met anybody else who knows as much about teamwear as you. So I thought I'd let you introduce yourself and kind of give us a bit of understanding of what is teamwear, what does that involve, how is it different to normal clothing, kind of go for it.
Cool. Nice to see you. So my background is in design and development of teamwear. So I've worked previously in brands, but for the last 4 years, I have been working at Commonwealth Games England with a secondment to the British Olympic Association. So I kind of have the brand side now and also the team side in terms of knowledge and challenges. So yeah, that's me.
And so when we say teamwear, what are we talking about? That is all of the clothes that the athletes wear for the games.
Yeah, so I guess in the context of my current role, we're talking about an event. So the Commonwealth Games, obviously the last one was in Birmingham, the Olympics, we've got one coming up in Paris in the summer. The athletes are away for about 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer when you put in training camps, and they need obviously garments to wear when they're away for training, competition, and throughout the games itself. So it's kind of making sure they get everything they need, making sure that it does what it needs to for each sport. Being a multi-sport games, the Olympics and the Commonwealth are both, multiple sports happening there. There's a wide breadth of different kits, so you've got cycling, might have wheelchair basketball, Commonwealth Games, judo, other different sports. So it's understanding what's needed and making sure they get what they need to be their best.
And that sounds like a really easy sentence, but I'm sure the realities of making that happen are a massive job. And I know we've talked about it a lot before in terms of logistically what goes into that. So I just wondered if you could share a bit more in terms of, from that date where the Olympics is announced, what happens, and how is kit a fundamental part of that?
So it's a really long process. I don't think people really understand the amount of time that it takes to get kit done. So we work on about a 3-year run-in. So the games is every 4 years. So 3 of those years, I'm generally working on kit, which is much longer, I think, than people know. When I talk to athletes about it, they're quite shocked that it takes so much time. So I would say the most important bit is the selection of the brand. So you're selecting a company that can provide the kit that you need and do it in time, which, we've spoken a lot about sort of lead times and stuff in the past. The next part is the research. So understanding from each team, straight from the horse's mouth, what is it that they need? What are the good things that they've had in the past, the bad things, and trying to sort of problem solve any areas where there may be issues with kit. Ultimately, they're getting gold medals in this kit. So I don't ever want there to be a chance where somebody could say, oh, well, if my top was a bit tighter, I might have gone faster, or, whatever it may be. So for me, it's really important that athlete engagement is super, super high up on my agenda. The research makes sure we're happy. And then there's a whole design process. So what's it going to look like? What colors are we going to use? What fabrics? Testing. So getting the garments on the athletes themselves so they can try them and make sure they're happy. And obviously there are challenges with each games around climate. So for example, Tokyo is one of the hottest Olympics on record. Depending on where you're going, you might need different types of kit from both a performance and a leisure wear perspective. So it's kind of making sure it's been tested properly. Ordering, which is its own beast. So you have to order your kit in plenty of time. Normally it's delivered about a year before, it's ordered about a year before the games happens. So it's a very long lead time. And then obviously the delivery of the kit and getting it to the athletes, which is a process that we call kitting out. That's the end delivery model to make sure everyone gets what they need. So yeah, it's long.
And there's so many questions within there. I mean, first of all, why is it so long? I think most people will be astounded that, it takes 3 years from kind of conception to delivery. Why does it take so long?
Well, I would say firstly, it's probably not 3 years for everybody. At the Commonwealth Games, we take inclusivity very seriously. So we have a very good history of athlete panels. So we have normally at least 2 athletes from every sport who come and join me to talk about what they need, to talk about colours, and we also talk about sustainability and like what they're going to do with the kit afterwards and how we can make it, how we can design it in a way that they would want to keep it. So that's the main reason I would say it takes so long. And then the second part of it is it's the lead times. If a lot of the product's made in Asia, it comes on a boat because that's more sustainable than flying it and more cost effective. And so, normally the shipping time is at least 12 weeks. That's 3 months. So as soon as you start thinking about these things, you've got to then get samples, and if you're, let's say, I don't know, we're doing a sport we've never done before, we have to get the samples, we have to test them. They may need remaking again and retesting. That process can happen 2 or 3 times. You've then lost, well, not lost, but that might take 8 months. So it is a long process, but it's also a lot of product. I think I ordered for the last games in the region of 33,000 items just for leisure wear. So that's just training and leisure. So it's a lot of kit and it's a big team. It's a lot of people. So yeah, there's a lot of different facets I think that need to be considered if you're going to do a good job, and we want to do a good job.
And, I mean, that covers so many sports. So trying to get the feedback from all the different sports, all the different individuals, is that idea of co-creation with the athlete quite normal practice? Or is that something that you've really had to pioneer because it wasn't existing in that way before?
It's a mixture, I would say. I think we probably do the best job from what I've heard from other people in the industry. The reason being we have our games is quite unique in so much as we have disabled athletes, para-athletes, as well as traditional athletes. Like at the Olympics, you wouldn't have a para element. So because people are competing together, we need to make sure that everybody is getting the best level of kit that they can. And I think that makes it more complicated. I think some of the sports are a little bit unusual. So, things like lawn bowls, that's not in the Olympics. The less traditional sports or maybe more traditional. So I think there is a really big breadth of challenges that we have as a team to make sure that everyone gets what they need. And I think we're just very invested in doing a good job. Like diversity and inclusion is really high up on our agenda, as is sustainability. And I know, it is getting that way for other people as well. But personally, I want to make sure I've done 2 games now. I worked on the Glasgow Games from a brand side. And I have this one memory, which I won't say who the athlete is, but an athlete came in and we hadn't ordered what he needed to compete. And it was because we didn't know what he needed. It wasn't because hadn't tried. It's just we hadn't got the information. So, standing in front of basically a Paralympian who is the best we've got in the world, and him looking at me going, well, you haven't got the kit that I need. And me going, oh God, we haven't got it was really embarrassing. Like I was mortally wounded. It was awful. And in my head that day, I was like, this has never happened. If I ever get the chance to do this again, this is not happening again. And so when it came to me doing this for Birmingham, I was very acutely aware of that in the back of my own mind from a personal perspective, as well as obviously the team are keen to make sure that we want people to have a good experience. We want them to be able to compete to their best. And if you don't feel good, if you don't look good, if the kit doesn't fit you properly, then those are all things that can affect your performance and your enjoyment of the sport. So for me, that's kind of where that best practice comes from. And with Birmingham, we had a lot of challenges because COVID happened. So, we had a pandemic in the middle of my development process. It was tough. Like, you're having to get samples. You can't necessarily get out to the team to see how the stuff's performing. But one thing that did happen that was actually positive was we were able to engage with many, many more athletes than we had in previous cycles. And because of this platform, so being able to go on, Teams or Zoom or whatever, and get 30 people in a room as opposed to 7 individuals around a table in somewhere in London was a revelation to me. And we'd followed exactly the same practice this time around, ready for the next games that's going to happen, because I think that buy-in is really important. What is very difficult as well, though, is like there's so much personal preference. So if you take a sport like athletics, you've got so many different disciplines in there, and you've got so many different body shapes, ages. It can be really difficult. If I'm talking to a shot putter, what they want is not going to be the same as a marathon runner. So you can try your best to ask the questions, and you can use historical data, which we do as well, like what we've used before and how popular the product's been. But you're just trying to get as much in as you can, really, information-wise.
And I know from speaking to you before, kind of ever since the day that we met, that diversity, inclusion, and sustainability are so important to you personally. And I remember you telling me a story about, a para-athlete, and they basically said to you, nobody has ever asked me what kit I want before. And almost you were the first person to do that. And, I find that across the board within clothing that a lot of people are just not asked or included in their opinion. So I just wanted to ask, A, if there's any best practices around this, and B, how do you manage that? Because ultimately there is an element of personal preference, but you also have to try and balance those orders, get it within price. How do you do that?
It's tough. Like you're never gonna be able to suit everybody. I guess what you've got to try and get to is where you're, from a percentage return basis, you're hitting a good number. So yes, I have, there's been a few times that I've had athletes who have, particularly para, who have never, they've told me, like, we've literally never been asked what we need before. It's difficult. I think a lot of it depends on the brand you're working with. So how much flexibility they have. We tend to work with smaller brands, and the reason for that seems to be that they are more nimble. So they can be more flexible with their supply chain. They are able to adjust, fits and product blocks and things like that for us, which is important. In terms of personal opinion, it is about research. I'm asking questions like, for example, when I first started in this industry, there was a massive kind of push on female fit products. So it's like, we don't have a female fit rugby kit, or we don't have an actual football kit that's for girls, which is absolutely right, that there should be. But what I really noticed this cycle with Birmingham happening in 2022, were quite a lot of the girls were choosing unisex product, which I thought was quite interesting. So now when I'm doing the research, I'm asking, what's the preference here? Because some garments, as you will know from your background, like they have to be fit to the body of the human, so like an athletics kit, you want it to be female fit and it needs to fit properly. When it comes to like a leisure wear t-shirt, for example, how important is it that it's got a size 12 on it in the inside rather than a size medium or a small? And I think that's where there seems to be culturally a bit of a shift. And I think that's around a whole bunch of different things like gender identity and, like, this argument I've had before, like, I don't know who's in the team when I'm ordering the kit. Like, I'm ordering about a year before the games. Selections for athletics and some other sports are happening like 2 weeks before the event happens. So you've got to make a number of educated guesses, I guess, and just asking the right questions. And ultimately, like, you're never going to get it perfect. I can stand in front of someone and say it's not perfect, but we have asked and we have done our absolute best. What I don't want to do is stand in front of somebody and say, oh, do you know what? I just didn't think about it. Because at least the intention is there to do a good job. I think it's the most you can do, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, it sounds obvious when you realise it, but I know when I've spoken to you and you're like, well, I don't know who's in the team. And I'm kind of like, well, how do you order the kit? And so you talked about a kitting out process. What is that? And where does that kind of fit into the athletes being able to choose their kit?
So, well, basically the kitting out is the end of the process. So kind of my job is done essentially when we have delivered the kit to the athlete. So kitting out is an event. It normally lasts for about 2 weeks. And we get many of the team in. So that's athletes, staff, and sort of support staff to come and actually try on their uniform. And then the idea is they walk away with their bags. So they have their luggage and they're ready for games. And it tends to happen a couple of weeks before the game starts, because after that, they tend to be going into like prep camps or training. So in terms of getting their sizes, I've got loads of data from games, years gone by. So what we have to try and do is kind of balance the information that we have. So I will know what was ordered last time, what was taken, what we had left over. And we always order a percentage more. It's a little bit like the fashion industry in that respect, because, when you're working in the retail industry, you don't really know what sizes necessarily you're going to be selling. So you will always order like a buffer. So I always have a bit extra, which helps me with sizing challenges. But essentially, I'm looking at the old data. I'm looking at the sports that are involved, because the data's good. But if, I don't know, there's no judo team in the next games, and the judo team are mainly made up of this body shape, then it's going to completely affect my order. So you have to make a few educated guesses. Like, if you're playing basketball, you're probably going to be over 6 foot. So you're probably going to need longer trousers. And netballers tend to need them as well. Some of the athletes from athletics. So we can kind of make some educated guesses. We obviously have this buffer as well. And the other thing that we've had that's been beneficial in the last couple of cycles is that our brand have had local manufacturing. So if there have been any, issues where something doesn't quite fit right, or we don't necessarily have enough kit of something, we can get it made locally, and it could be turned around in a couple of weeks, which is a massive saving grace when it comes to competition wear. Doesn't happen for leisure wear, because the hoodies and sweatpants and trackies and all those things, they're generally made offshore. But when it comes to, I don't know, let's say a table tennis shirt, if we needed 5 at short notice, we can get them made. So that is another reason why the brand is very important for us, because if we didn't have that flexibility, I would need to order so much more kit, and then it'd get wasted. So it is a bit of a balance to kind of strike. The other thing is they're only away for 2 weeks, and there are washing facilities. So, you do have to balance that. Depending on where you're going, like how good are the washing facilities going to be? If it's mass laundered, is the product going to be, I don't know, come out okay? Like in one, if it's washed at, I don't know, 80 degrees or 90 degrees, probably not. So there are, things rip sometimes, people have accidents, things get lost. So you do need to have a bit of buffer to kind of cope for those things. But yeah, in generally, it's hard, but I think we've got it down quite well recently. And I think moving forward, it'll be interesting for me to see how technology might help. So AI, things like 3D body mapping and stuff like that could be helpful. One thing that we do fairly early on is we have a long list of athletes. So let's say, I have no idea how long it is, but let's say, I don't know, we're going to take 500 people to the games. We may have a list of 2,000 people who are like potentials. And so they will fill in like accreditation information so we can get, proof of ID and all that stuff so they can compete. And at that point, we ask them about their sizes, how tall they are, what shoe size they may be for socks, because we don't do shoes, but we do socks. And so we are getting that information. But obviously, all you need is one 6'6" person to drop out. And then I've got a bit of kit that I can't do anything with. So it is a challenge. And then the final bit I would say is at kitting out, we have a tailor. So we always make sure we have somebody there to do tailoring. And the person that we had last time, I'm going to give him a shout because he's amazing, Jerry. He tailored so much stuff for us, and particularly, para athletes and those of short stature. He was really like chopping bits off and stitching them back together, and they looked like they'd not been touched. So he did a really wonderful job, and that is very important because sometimes you can't account for every variable that there might be. And so some of the things you have to do at the end. And I guess the final part there is just making sure when you're designing the product that you design it in a way that if you start chopping bits off, you're not losing half the design. So because then the person who's wearing that kit will look very different to the rest of the team. And one thing we don't want is anybody being singled out or looking like their kit's been tailored. We want it to look the same. So yeah, it's a bit of a complex complex challenge, you might say. But I love it, and so far we've done it all right, I think.
But to me, I think that's why you are the oracle in this, because you really do understand every stage of that production process, and you do sweat that design phase and make sure that it's really thought through so that you don't end up with those problems at the end. And, there's always that famous stat of 80% of environmental impact is factored in at design phase. What can we do at that phase to really make sure that we are reducing that impact? If there is a risk of having leftover stock, what can we do in terms of A, design, but B, kind of monitoring those quantities?
So, I mean, for me, the design phase is like this business critical, basically. So our event's only for like 2 weeks, let's say, every fourth summer, usually. And for me, it's like what happens to that kit after the games. So we want to design it in a way where the team are invested in it and they like wearing it and they want to wear it afterwards. The challenge there is when you're like we only have our athletes for a game cycle. So when they're not competing for us, they're competing for another English team. So England judo, British judo or England athletics, so they don't tend to have a lot of opportunity to wear the kit. So one thing that we do is we always consider on each item, like how English is it? So how much does it say England on it? For example, the last games in Birmingham, probably, I don't know, 50% of it was fairly plain. And then there were some sort of key hero items like the podium tracksuit, and there was a training T-shirt that said England down the back. But if it is not so singing and dancing like Team England, then it can be worn later. And when I'm looking on Instagram and stuff and I see people wearing kit, like even now from 2 years ago, I love it because I'm like, yes, we did a good job. So I think, there's that design element. There's obviously the fabrication. So what are you making it out of? And a lot of brands focus on recycled polyester. You know this because this is your specialism. It's not the end of the story. Like there are other things we can be making it out of apart from polyester. So yes, polyester tends to be the number one from a performance perspective because, of the wicking properties and the durability and all those different things that we know about. But, what else can we use? More sustainable, we did a sustainable viscose, for example, that can be used. And it's just kind of understanding what can we do to make it have a longer life, and definitely buying less. So I purposefully made an effort this time to not have quite so much product, but make it better quality. So make sure that people would want to keep it, not a lot of repetition. If you get 4 of one T-shirt, you're unlikely to keep 4. If you get 2, you might keep 1 and donate 1, so that would, for me, be a better solution. And then from an over ordering perspective, like I have to order, buffer, but I guess it's taking ownership of that buffer and what do you do with it at a later date. So we donate all of our product post games, and it's not a ton. I think probably about 30% more than we need. And by the time you take exchanges or like repairs, like people that need extra bits, probably it goes down to about 20%, I would say. And that's across the whole team, including staff. We make sure that we donate it to charity, and there's a charity called Kit Us Out that we use, who they repurpose the product both offshore, like in some of the Commonwealth nations actually, but also in the UK. So during the pandemic, when doctors and nurses couldn't get home, they donated a lot of our old kit from Gold Coast to some hospitals. So they were wearing Team England kit kind of in between, their normal work uniform, which is great. And as long as you have visibility about where the stuff is going, and it is going to the place you think it is, it's not getting sold in a market somewhere in Africa and doesn't end up in the hands of somebody that you wouldn't want it to. I think it's really important that you consider that end of life. And for me, dealing with the athletes, talking through our athlete panels, like they don't really think about that. They don't really think about the longevity because their aim is to get there, to get a medal, to perform, to do a good job. Like that's their focus and that's what it should be. But a lot of them are really interested in the sustainability angle. And when you talk about things that you're doing to improve it. So I just remember one of our athletes was really shocked when I said, so we removed the swing tags off all of our uniform because it's not going into a shop. It doesn't need a price ticket on it. It's compulsory to wear it. So they're not going to be like, oh, yes, I like that one. And how much is it? So that saved 33,000 plastic strings, the Kimballs, because we didn't have them on there. And that sounds so ridiculous, like so stupid, but it's actually a big difference because you can't recycle those things. They can't go into your recycling at home or whatever. Packaging, we made the carrier bags a bit smaller, the packaging bags, so they don't use as much single-use plastic. We use recycle ones, which were slightly cloudy because, again, it's not going into a retail store. You don't need to see the kit. So, there are things you can do. Packing it in socks, you get 3 pairs of each type of sock. Well, you don't need an individual pack of socks. You just get a pack of 3. So then you're cutting down the plastic. So some of it's quite kind of practical and straightforward, things like that. But I think the athletes, they were really interested when they understood that because they can see the impact they're making. And then when we talk to them about kind of end of life, it's like, being mindful of what you do with that product. It's taken us 3 years to design it and develop it and make it. It costs an awful lot of money, and I'm not even going to mention how much the budget is, but it costs a lot of money. It's a lot of kit. Do something positive with it. If you don't need it, there'll be somebody else that does. So, what can you do with that? Give it back to us. Give it to your local club. Donate it to charity. Auction it off for charity if that's something you want to do. So, yeah, it's trying to think about it holistically from like end to end. Basically, is where we're getting to, I think.
And I think that's a really important point because a lot of people see sustainability almost like a cost center. It's something that's going to cost me money. It's complex. I've got to measure it and track it. And until I've done that, I'm not even going to make a start. And I think there is some really low hanging fruit that is super simple, that is very practical. Like just remove the Kimballs and the swing tags, because actually it's quicker to get through production. It's cheaper. There's a lot of other knock-on benefits. So I think there's so many practical applications that people can kind of borrow from you. Have you seen other best practice either within teamwear or within the clothing industry that you would like to see implemented across the board?
I think there's an awful lot of focus on the fashion industry, and I think that's really good. As you know, fashion is like one of the biggest polluters in the world. I think the sports industry, so I work on an event, but there are football teams, rugby teams, netball teams, all teams of all sports competing all day, every day of the week. And they will also have quite a lot of kit and there'll be challenges and it changes seasonally and stuff like that. So I think it's good to see that there is some investigation into that area now. And I'm pleased to sort of have been a part of that. I think the one thing that I have seen that's changed in recent years I'm excited about is this kind of like nearshore production. So we've always been really reliant on particularly China from a production perspective because, most of the fabrics are being made over that way, labour's cheaper, etc. But as things are changing there, the emerging middle classes and stuff like that, it does mean that we are, as businesses and as brands, when I was brand side, thinking a little bit differently about where do we make this stuff. And it can have such a big impact. There's been a few studies going on sort of that I've been part of that are really about counting the kit that you've had and what's it made of and that kind of stuff. And that's brilliant. It's a great start. Like we need to start making benchmarks and understanding how we can improve. But there are so many different facets, like where is it made? How was it transported? Where does it go afterwards? There's a ton of stuff. So for me, I think this nearshoring and like as I said, we have some kit that was made in the UK. It just gives you so much more flexibility. A 12-week shipping time, that's 3 months. It's a long time. There's also more risk because, the Panama Canal or something getting shut or, something happening, which has happened, these things have happened. Suddenly you're a bit stuck, aren't you? I mean, during COVID, the shipping prices went through the roof and then there weren't enough containers. There weren't physically enough containers to put product in to get them here. And we were just like, oh my goodness, thankfully it didn't affect us because of the timing. But you can kind of see how coming closer to home with production is kind of more helpful. And from a sampling perspective, it's quicker. So for me, I think there's a few things that are going on that make me pleased to see that there's change afoot. But I do still think the sportswear industry is like we're on the back foot. Like, we're not at the front of it. We're not like the fashion industry trying to kind of really actively do better. I mean, I say we, I mean that in the more broader sense of the world, because, we are at Team England. But yeah, I think in general, it's just good to see that some of those things are rubbing off now. The penny is dropping about how much polyester we're putting out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a much greater awareness now. In terms of sustainability, a lot has been around stadium or fan travel or carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that every athlete has to wear something, to play in. I think people are starting to understand that. But there's also this idea that, sports is highly linked to performance and, it's always going to be the best. So, of course, they would be driving agendas like sustainability. And we've seen some brands put out some very strong statements around that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the quantities of product that are produced are always in the public domain. And so people don't always realize how big the impact is of the sportswear apparel business. And you talked about nearshoring and how that can help. And that's something where, 30 years ago, it was more commonplace to be making in the UK. And I wondered how you've seen the industry change, over your time working in it. Do you think it has evolved for the better in terms of sustainability? Or do you think, we've kind of gone down a route of globalization and mass production? What are your thoughts on where we've been and also where we're going to go?
I think it's a really interesting question, and it's a difficult one actually to answer, because I think that it's quite multifaceted. So there's an element of, the most important thing for me is to help people be their best. So I don't want to do anything that's going to prohibit that, and that is the number one aim of the game. But as we've just discussed, very sort of loosely, there are lots of things we can do that do not affect that. So for me, if it's a no-brainer, if it doesn't affect the end result, then like crack on and let's do it. I think the challenge with how the industry is going is certainly China's getting more expensive. So people are trying to find new places to make kit. And there are lots of places, which you obviously know all about this as well, that are nearer, but still mainly in Asia. For me, I think it's about striking a balance, and it's about truly understanding from a sustainability angle, and people like you and others that are doing good work in this area to make it a valuable asset to a business. Because right now I think there's a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of times where people say, like, we're looking at it, and even like when we were doing our tender process, one of the things I wanted to know was about sustainability credentials from these brands, and some of it is incredibly wishy-washy, like very, very light touch, you might say. Some of it is really great, and that's good, and even like for me, I'd rather see somebody being honest and saying, like, we don't have all the answers, but we are going to do these practical things. So, for example, we are going to cut out the amount of plastic we're using for bags, or we are going to not use, like, it's easy to do that. It doesn't cost any money. In fact, it probably saves you money. And it doesn't need like a big manifesto and all of this stuff around it. I think the challenge around like recycled polyester at the moment is that everybody's jumping on that bandwagon. Particularly the smaller brands. Like, it's harder when you're a small brand to have access to technology. Financially, sometimes it can be difficult because you maybe don't have the expertise, and you might need to like get help in from an external consultant, which can sometimes be expensive. So I think for me, it's just making sure that people are making practical steps. It's trying to get a bit more production over this way. I mean, Europe would be great. There are brands that are making in Europe. I know when we did our opening ceremony kit, we had that made in Blackburn in Lancashire, and that was amazing. And the fabric was from England, or I think it was from the UK, most of it. And it was sewn down the road, which is amazing. And I went and had a look, and I could sort of do the QC and check what was going on there, walk around like a sea of red, which was amazing, red jackets. So I think there are things that can be done, but it is hard because also the skills are dying. There aren't that many people. Education is going to be so important to help get more people back into those trades. People that work in factories and do stitching and whatever. And people need to be prepared for, like, from a consumer perspective of like, it will cost more money. I mean, everything costs more money these days in general, but like, just buy less, buy less, buy well, keep it as long as you can, do something good with it at the end, end of its life. But I think with sportswear, it can be much harder because particularly in a commercial environment, I know you've done a lot in football, but there is a commercial element there, isn't there, of like you want to sell a new shirt every season. So the rat run just keeps going because, everybody needs to make $1 or £1. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like there are a few challenges. I just hope that we can keep learning from, what is happening out there in fashion, keep trying to find sort of practical solutions, and just, keep striving, because most important is the intention. Like, the intention to do better is, well, it's the beginning, isn't it? So I don't know. It's hard, but there has been a lot of change. I mean, God, I used to spend half my life in China. Those days are now not happening. But I don't know. It's very complicated. There's a lot of different things to think about, for sure.
And you talk briefly about kind of lessons learned. What's the biggest lesson you've learned over the course of your career?
Many. I would say in the most recent years, like working team side, I think never underestimate the importance of asking what may seem like a stupid question. When I watch like the TV and you're watching the news and it's like, oh God, have you seen this kit thing that's happened? And the England football team, the girls are wearing white shorts and they're very upset about it, but the rugby team aren't bothered, and everyone's like, how has this happened? How are these girls wearing white shorts? Well, it's very easy. It happened because nobody asked them. And just having the intention to do better is just so important. And actually ask the people who are wearing the kit. We talked earlier about Tess and the hockey situation with shorts. Well, as soon as they asked for them, it was kind of like, well, why haven't we done this before? Well, it's because nobody asked, nobody thought. So for me, whether it be fashion, whether it be sportswear, but critical in sportswear, go to the end user, the person that's going to be wearing the kit, and find out what it is they need. And 90% of the time, you'll be able to make some inroads. They may not be perfect, but you'll be able to do something. Even if you can't fix the problem, the intent to fix it makes them feel better, makes them feel heard. And hopefully, people will learn moving forward. But for me, yeah, it's the choice, giving people choice and giving them a voice to be able to say, what's good and what's bad and how we can make it better. I think for me, don't assume you know everything, because it's easy to be like, oh, well, I've done rugby kit before. Let's just do it this way. But things change. People's ideas change. Socially, things change. Emotionally, the world is moving. I might make a decision today for the next games, and the next time I ask the question, I'll get a completely different answer. So yeah, I think that's for me. Don't assume you know everything. No question is stupid.
I think it's such a good point. And don't assume that because you've asked, it remains the same. I think that's also a key point, to keep asking those questions and to check in. And, something that I found with my research and talking to organizations is many organizations are very siloed. So, the person talking to the athlete is often very different to the person who is, placing the order or writing the sustainable procurement policy. And I know there is a focus now from governing bodies, from associations, to do something with this topic. I feel people don't necessarily know what, but it often starts with, well, let's write a sustainable procurement policy.
Mm-hmm.
What role do you think those stakeholders have in this? Whose responsibility is it to try and change the game and to make things more sustainable in a way that isn't a choice, in a way that's kind of almost written in contractually?
Look, you're always going to have to balance these different areas. So, the commerciality of a project, a kit project, for example, is going to be really important, because you've got to pay for this kit somehow, and it costs an awful lot of money. A lot of governing bodies, don't have money coming out of their ears, so they may be very much led by that kind of sponsorship deal, or gift of kit, or whatever it may be. I think for me, it's about collaboration. So it's about trying to include as many. It's difficult because you don't want to too many chefs and all that kind of stuff, but you want to try and include, for me, one person from each area. So, you have somebody from commercial, you have somebody from coaching, you have somebody from the athlete contingent, like a player, to try and understand what the challenges are and what the kind of non-negotiables are from a team perspective. It does definitely need to be collaborative, but I do also think it needs to be very much, it's the brands that are in charge of this stuff. Like, I know my role at Team England is very unique. I don't think there's anyone else that I can think of that's doing exactly the same role as me. And I mean that in so much as you'll often have a kit manager, but normally it's a very administrative role. So it's more about the ordering, the logistics, that kind of stuff. Whereas kind of my focus, because I have been in the engine room, from factories and things, my focus is kind of the whole process from start to finish. So I can question a brand. If I'm stood in front of a company and they're saying to me, well, this is how sustainable we're going to be, I have the ability through my knowledge and my experience to check and challenge, maybe ask a few questions, put them on the spot a little bit. Whereas if you're a much smaller team or you don't have somebody with that experience, you are very much at the mercy of what they're telling you. And I'm not saying that anyone's lying, because they're not lying, but you just can't scrutinize it, because you don't have the skills, the language, the knowledge to ask those right questions. But I do think it's in the hands of the brands to do better, and also the hands of the teams to demand better. So knowledge is power. If people do learn and can learn over kind of years, whatever, or can be educated on sustainability and different aspects around kit particularly, then they can go and ask the right questions and they can hold people accountable. Sadly, a lot of brands are going to be slow on the uptake because they think it's going to cost them money, and it's hard. Change is hard. When you've done something the same for 100 years, it's difficult to put your head above the parapet and say, all right, we've got to do it different. I mean, I think they are, but we do need to be demanding better. And I think that's one thing that definitely at Team England we have been doing, much to the disappointment of the people that I'm working with, probably, because I have to ask a lot of questions. But I think it is important that brands get on board with it. And I definitely think we're seeing that happen. Interestingly, I think a lot of the smaller brands are all over it, because it's a good kind of USP that they are kind of matching, keeping up to date and trying to push and do things a bit differently. But I don't know, Rome wasn't built in a day. I think it just needs it needs more than just a few people, a few voices. It needs people from different walks of life, different jobs, different roles, to all kind of, put their hand up and say, this is where we need to go, and how do we do that together, very collaboratively.
Love that. I could talk to you all day. I feel like just the knowledge soaks in, Lou, every time I speak to you. But I just wanted to ask if there's anything else that you wanted to cover or share just before we wrap up.
No, I don't think so. I think, firstly, look, it's been really good to chat to you. Obviously, you and I could talk for days about this stuff, and there's still time. I think it's really good to sort of shine a light on this area. I have found myself quite frustrated when you hear people talking about, what's going on in fashion and all this stuff, and you can just see this massive untapped world that I live in, that I work in, and it is changing. People are trying really hard, and it's starting to push, but it's a little bit like pushing an elephant up a hill, because these brands need to get on board and they need to see the value in change, particularly around team kit, I think. And also the other thing is, there's not that many brands. You could probably count, I'm not going to name any of them, but you could probably count on 5 fingers the main players in pretty much every sport, pretty much every team. So it would only need a few to make real solid commitments and meaningful ones, to kind of make things start to escalate and move more quickly. But no, I think we've covered a lot today for a change.
This is just an insight into mine and Lou's chats, normally.
Honestly, I never let you go. I'll be chewing your ears off for hours. But no, I think, look, it's been really good. I hope that people will listen to this and will understand kind of the challenges that we have and how we, the likes of you, me, and others are trying to overcome some of these things. And I hope that people will be interested to learn more about, what they can do in their own role or their own team, if they're in a team, to just start to move things forward. Because, small steps. We'll get
Definitely. There. And I think, that's the key thing. We've all got a part to play. And the idea of this series was to kind of go through that process, to have a designer, to have somebody who's responsible for the ordering, to have a brand owner, to have Tess as the athlete, and then to have somebody who's upcycling as well, and Nicole. And I hope that people can really kind of tap into that, whatever their role is within the industry, and kind of understand in a bit more depth, because this is one of the most damaging industries, and because it is under sports, it is like the elephant in the room. It's not considered, but it does have a massive contribution to environmental, degradation in so many different ways. So that's why it's been an amazing to talk to you, Lou, to kind of get that insight, to understand, the complexities of ordering team kit when you don't even know who's in that team. The fact that it takes 3 years to get that kit from idea to the player, and to understand actually what happens to it at its end of life, and what can we do about it in a really practical, low complex, low cost way. So thank you very much for being on the podcast, Lou. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me. And we will speak again, Jo.
We will. See you later.